Well, good evening, wrestling fans, and you are live with the Two Bros Wrestling Show. And we just finished watching NXT Takeover 31. And by we, I mean me, the lone bro. If you've noticed, once again, we're not two, we are one. Again, apologize for Doug's absence, but we've discovered here on the Two Bros Show, Doug is sort of like our version of Raw Underground. Some weeks we can just leave him out altogether, and then we wait to see if anyone notices or even more so complains. Hopefully Doug will be able to return to us. But this week we're going to go ahead and talk about the event we all just hopefully watched, and that is NXT Takeover. For those of you watching this not live but watching it archived and want to know whether or not you should invest your time in this event, as always here on the Two Bros Show, we're going to first talk to you a little bit about the event itself, a review that is a very much non-spoiler, and then we're going to dive deep into match-by-match analysis for those of you who want to discuss what we just got through seeing tonight. So first, I'll just say that if you did not watch tonight's event, absolutely go check it out. Obviously we're live here barely after 9:30, and that alone tells you that NXT once again delivers on its all killer no filler ethos, and that the worst match tonight honestly was still a solid B in my book. So when you have an event that can wind down in under 2.5 hours with no bad matches whatsoever, some really outstanding matches, and the worst match being a solid B, absolutely go check it out. So that's a very quick spoiler free review, so that if you are wondering whether or not you should watch the show, go watch it now. Come back, of course, remember where you were in this broadcast, and come back and listen to us talk a little bit more in depth about each and every individual match. But definitely go right now and see this complete thumbs up show as NXT Takeover once again delivers, as it does more often than not. So let's now talk specifics. And we're going to be getting into spoiler territory here in a moment, folks. So if that is something you're averse to, again, you too can come back and join us after you have a chance to see the show. But before we start talking match by match, I want to just talk about the environment of tonight's show. It would be remiss for me not to mention the fact that tonight's broadcast took place from a new location. For the near entirety of the NXT series, when it has been a television show that we've had available to us on the WWE Network, it has been broadcast from Full Sail University in Orlando, Florida. And the partnership that WWE has maintained with that university has pretty much extended through the life of the NXT brand itself. That recently wrapped up. In fact, the last tapings would have been aired. The results of those tapings would have aired during this last week on the NXT programming. Tonight was night one of NXT broadcasting from its new location, and this will be permanent moving forward. And folks, it is the Performance Center. It is the Performance Center where we had seen so much of WWE programming over the time of the pandemic before they moved on to the Thunderdome and tried to liven up the product. So you're probably wondering to yourself, why are they back in the Performance Center? Well, it's the Performance Center, but it's not. They're calling it the Capitol Wrestling Center. And if that rings any bells to those of you who are old school wrestling fans, Capitol Wrestling was the name of the company that Vince McMahon Sr. basically operated since the 1950s before his son took over in the 70s. They continued to call it Capitol Wrestling as far as the company itself that operated WWE, or at the time WWF, behind the scenes. And so this is sort of a nod to the origins of World Wrestling Entertainment. And basically they have, according to Triple H anyway, they gutted the Performance Center and rebuilt it from scratch. And what does that mean as far as how it looks? I would say that it's probably over-exaggeration to say they completely gutted it. Maybe they did, but the presentation itself is so dark, it's sort of hard to tell if they did or didn't. If they did and are keeping the arena that dark, grimy sort of look, which, honestly isn't bad, but they probably wasted a lot of money if they were hoping that some of the gutting and the renovations they were doing were going to show on the broadcast. Essentially what you get now is more of a mini Thunderdome concept. As a hybrid with what they were doing before, that being a select number of people behind plexiglass surrounding the ring. So they're doing a little bit of each. From my understanding, those that were around the ring tonight are a combination of athletes there at the Performance Center, some employees, family members, and some select fans. So this may be as they move forward and try to find ways to bring fans back into the live environment there at NXT. This might be something we're going to see more of. But there were the fans at ringside behind the plexiglass, very similar to how they presented in the past. And then behind them were fans on the monitors, very similar to Thunderdome. Now, in Thunderdome, I think the reason it looks cool is that it's very much a layered look where you have staggered rows where it looks as if the fans are sitting in an arena. Here, because of the size of the Performance Center, let's say it, the Capitol Wrestling Center. The Capitol Wrestling Center is a small space, so it is a flat screen that these faces are projected on behind the live actual crowd. And so that kind of gives a bit of an odd look, to be honest. It looks like a giant Zoom call because it's flat, lacks the depth that you see with Thunderdome. But still, is it better than what they had as far as setup goes? Absolutely. Is it as groundbreaking as they wanted to make it appear and sound as they hyped it all night long? No, not quite. But still a step in the right direction. So that's sort of how they had it set up. And that's something we're going to talk about later on the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We're going to have a show down the line. Doug and I are going to discuss where we are in this pandemic era as far as presentation of live wrestling. We've seen, of course, as we've moved forward through this pandemic, that the companies have presented the product in very different ways, and it's evolved over time. So I think it's time that we look again and see where all of them have currently landed. They're all presenting it differently. There's things I like about each, and there's things I don't like about each. So we're going to discuss that at a later date. So then, now that we have our setting there at the Capitol Wrestling Center, which I do believe the announcers were, given bonuses every time they mentioned it. You'll never hear an arena mentioned nearly as often as you did tonight, with the announcers repeatedly calling it the Capitol Wrestling Center, trying desperately to get that new concept over. The announcers themselves, I will also say, it's an interesting thing that they had going on tonight, because Beth Phoenix as well as Wade Barrett, they are the color commentators to Vic Joseph. Tonight they were not there live, it didn't seem. You could see Vic Joseph at ringside, and next to him you saw someone who kind of looked like Wade Barrett, and someone who didn't at all look like Beth Phoenix, but I believe was supposed to represent Beth Phoenix. Now, it's not unusual, particularly during COVID-19 in the sports world, to have our announce crews elsewhere in the country and doing these shows remotely. What is unusual is for them to pretend as if they were there live, to the point that they put stand-ins next to Vic Joseph there at ringside. So again, a little bit odd presentation, but we'll forgive it because of the action tonight. We'll start with the first match. That first match tonight really set the tone for the entire evening, and that was the North American title match between Damian Priest and Johnny Gargano. Priest began to use his size to his advantage, whereas Johnny did what would be natural for a man of his size, and that is try to attack the lower body of the much larger Damian Priest in order to sort of break him down and keep him down on the mat. I'd love to see Johnny win some more of these feuds that he gets himself involved in. But at this point, he really is sort of Teflon in that he can take loss and it doesn't seem to hurt his popularity or the way that the fans appreciate the work that he put in. Both men worked hard. I think that it was a very, very strong opener. I think that they could have taken it up one more gear if they had wanted to, but I almost wonder if they were holding back just a tad, because last week when we had the last pay-per-view, and that was WWE doing their Payback pay-per-view, the first match of the evening stole the show and it went downhill very fast. So I think they wanted to set the bar at a really high level without necessarily stealing the show, leaving some room for the other matches later on to maybe even overtake the first match. And certainly, there was everything right about the first match, and hopefully rematches down the line, maybe placed a little later on the card where they can then take it to that extra gear that we know that they all have. But it was very much a good opener that set the tone. The next match that they had on the evening would probably be the match that as I mentioned earlier, if there was one match that was probably my least favorite of the night, it was this one. Even as such, it is a solid B in contest. you had Kushida taking on Velveteen Dream. And to me, really, what was as interesting as the match itself, which we are going to analyze, is the placement of this card, this match on the card, as well as the outcome. What does that say about the current standing of both of these individual wrestlers and the directions that each of these individual wrestlers are heading? In the contest, Kushida did beat Velveteen Dream. But then, again, looking at the placement of this match, I think you could probably, analyze that Kushida is one of those individuals who has all the talent in the world, but I'm thinking that WWE seems to know that they have had a problem in the past with getting Japanese talent over here in America. Particularly when you have the language barrier where the gentlemen don't necessarily know enough English to carry themselves on a promo in English. And I think that what's happened, if you just look as recent as Kenta, and, of course, he was Hideo Itami in WWE. He came over, he had all the hype in the world, all the skills in the world. An injury took him out, kind of paused the push he was getting. When he came back, he was never able to regain that momentum. And that's exactly the situation that we currently see Kushida in. A man who came with all the hype in the world, all the skills in the world, but lacking that command of the English language, suffers an injury before he fully gets over with the NXT American crowd. And now you bring him back and you try to reheat him up. And I think that the WWE has in the back of their mind what happened with Kenta and are trying to learn from their mistakes. So they have repackaged Kushida as a much more aggressive version of his former self, having him so much as admit in promos that I was being too nice, that was holding me back, you're going to see a new man unleashed. So I think that this tonight was the debut, really, of that very hardcore, serious version of Kushida trying to go to the next level. On the other hand, you have Velveteen Dream perhaps heading in an opposite direction. Another man who has all the talent in the world, but not even that long ago, very recently, he was a man who was on one of these takeover events with a world title match there in his pocket. So he was at the very top of the card, and now he's in the second match of the night and losing in the second match of the night. And of course, again, the man has had all the talent in the world, but has recently been rocked by some scandal. And even if you don't buy into the fact that he had been cleared of all allegations that were levied against him in the Me Too style movement, of the speaking out movement, as it was called in the world of professional wrestling, if you believe he is innocent of those charges, and all of us are afforded the belief of innocence until proven guilty, there's still a reputation there beyond just those allegations. There's a reputation behind the scenes that he is difficult to work with. He is difficult to direct. So it's not just the wrestlers who work with him, but those who are agents and such backstage, trying to get him to fully invest and believe what they are telling him, and not doing what he wants going into business for himself. He always brings it on TakeOver. He oftentimes is in a position to steal the show because he's just that good a performer. But because of things that may be happening off screen, it would seem, anyway, on the surface, you could definitely look at this, analyze it, and say this is part of his punishment, or that maybe finally management has soured on him and have decided that maybe he, as talented as he is, might be more trouble than he's worth. But all of that said, let's talk about the match itself. You would have found this amusing. I did, that we had Velveteen Dream come out and was basically doing a riff on Back to the Future. He came out dressed like Doc Brown, and this was a play on the fact that Kushida's nickname is the Time Splitter, and sort of his whole look. Throughout the contest, Velveteen Dream was hollering at him, calling him Marty, that sort of thing. I actually, I sometimes can be a little difficult and hard on these attempts at humor in the world of professional wrestling. That one actually got me as being clever and funny, and it was actually in many ways the highlight of the match. It was solid. It was not very lengthy. It didn't overstay its welcome. I like the vicious version of Kushida. It's definitely an improvement. The match ended with this great-looking hoverboard lock from the top rope that Kushida refused to relinquish, even as Velveteen Dream went through a series of reversal attempts that just did not work and eventually had to tap out. And then after the match, Kushida furthered his beatdown and attacked him even more, which again was completely out of character for the old Kushida. And of course, this is the new and improved version of Kushida. So if this is a rebranding moment for Kushida, then in that way it was successful. Solid B match. Don't go out of your way to see this one if you only have a limited amount of time, but that's as low as tonight's card got, which is still pretty darn good. So let's go to the match next that I believe, in my opinion, stole the night. And that was the Cruiserweight Championship with the champion Santos Escobar defending against Isaiah Swerve Scott. To my surprise, the announcers said that this was the first time that the NXT Cruiserweight Championship had been defended on NXT pay-per-view. Originally, the Cruiserweight Championship was sort of its own thing, and it was assigned to the Raw brand, given its own show eventually with 205 Live. But as that show has evolved over time, and NXT has evolved over time, they've sort of enveloped the Cruiserweight division into NXT, which I honestly think is the right move and a good idea. Particularly when you're back in front of crowds. The larger live crowds burn out after a Raw or SmackDown were not always the kindest to the cruiserweight wrestlers. So I believe that once fans do come back, if they do 205 Live in front of the NXT audience, you're going to have a much greater appreciation for the athletes involved and their skills that they're showing. And you could not have had a better example of those skills than two talented individuals like Santos Escobar and Isaiah Swerve Scott. It was one of the better stories going into the pay-per-view tonight. The feud between Swerve and Escobar is long-standing and is one that they have gone back and forth on, with Swerve actually holding 2 pinfall victories, even though not for the title, but 2 pinfall victories over Escobar. And they got off to a quick start, exactly as you'd expect 2 men of this caliber to do. They eventually settled into some mat-based action, and at first I was worried they were going to go with a cheap finish, because if there was one part of the match I didn't as much care for, is there got to be a little bit of too many outside factors involved with the Escobar's crew coming down, and then Isaiah Swerve Scott having one of his friends that came and mitigated those circumstances and got rid of Escobar's men. So I was afraid they were going to go to a finish somewhere in there, because at that point there had been a couple of minutes where the focus was off the 2 men in the ring. Fortunately, it was just a false finish, and they did many very believable near falls, including one with a Phantom Driver by Santos Escobar, his finisher, a great 450 splash from Isaiah Swerve Scott that believably could have been the end of this contest, but wasn't. At the end came with Escobar win was as much a bad thing that happened to Swerve as anything that happened that Escobar had precipitated himself. And it may have been a little bit of a cheap finish to the end of what otherwise was a stellar contest. But the ring post itself, the steel, had been exposed earlier in the contest. And at one point, after being kicked off, Isaiah Swerve Scott struck his head on it, which ended up leading to Escobar being able to, put a move on Swerve and finish him off in that fashion. But that shouldn't at all downgrade the overall action of tonight. It was extremely good, and in my mind was the match of the evening. Very much in my mind a show stealer, and one that you should definitely catch. But again, Escobar maintains, and because of the finish and the fact that Swerve Scott does hold 2 victories over Escobar, I would personally love it if this long-standing feud that they built till tonight goes even a little bit longer, so that Swerve can get one more chance for revenge and a chance to get that belt. Then we moved into the women's championship match, when you had the champion Io Shirai defending against Candice LeRae. And this was another one that I was a little worried about. After some really good action, we had a ref bump. And actually, it ended up being a double ref bump. He got hit once, and then as he started to come to, he got taken out a second time. About this point is when Candice got a visual fall, which is kind of unusual to see the heel getting the visual fall on the face, but that would make sense very shortly, as the reason they did this is that Johnny Gargano ran to the ring to try to help his bride out by counting the fall. Of course, he's wearing a ref shirt, which is one of the more ridiculous things that WWE, even in its NXT iteration, will use as a ploy in its matches. That as long as you're wearing the shirt, somehow that makes you a semi-official. He did not count a 3. He tried, which I also thought was funny, that instead of just slapping the mat 3 times, he actually stopped once EO kicked out and at 2. And eventually the ref came to, and that led to a little bit of shenanigans. And again, sometimes I'm hard on comedy in wrestling. I will say that this was also pretty funny because Johnny is just so good at what he does, and I couldn't help but smile as the ref argued with him and was saying, "That's my shirt," and was asking for his shirt back. It wasn't enough just to kick him out and get back to his job. Apparently he recognized that the shirt Johnny was wearing happened to belong to him, and he was wanting it back. During that exchange, a belt got involved that Johnny had brought into the ring, and it looked as if it could be possibly the finish, that you would have the belt used, and that Candice would walk away with the championship. That did not happen. Fortunately, there was a kick out, and that wasn't the cheap finish. But eventually, what we got was a victory by the champion retaining, Io Shirai. And in many ways, I think Candice LeRae is becoming sort of the female version of her husband. Someone who gets involved in these high-profile feuds that they put on NXT television that end up being one of the best things that you're seeing on NXT television. And, despite that, she doesn't win nearly as often as you'd think. Oh, hi, Jesse. Thanks for tuning in. Your son's absent tonight, but I appreciate the wave. Appreciate you looking at the broadcast. We're sitting here at this point. We're in the women's match, which is near the end of the show, and it was a solid match. It was not a show stealer, but it was very good. In many ways, I think the headlines coming out of this match was less the outcome of the match and the match itself than two surprises at the end of the match, as gave a little bit of a hint as to where they may be going in NXT when it comes to the women's division. At the very end of the contest, as Io celebrated in the ring, the monitors, the screens turned, and you got a promo from the returning Toni Storm. Toni Storm has not been seen in action on any WWE programming since the pandemic started, and she is more associated with the WWE NXT UK brand. And so she not only announced her return and her intentions to insert herself into the world title picture, she inserted herself into the American version of NXT, which I think is a good promotion for her. And everyone is going to love Toni time if you're not familiar with Toni Storm at all. And then in the even bigger, I think in some ways, return was a mystery woman who was then shown on the screen driving up to the arena, getting off a motorcycle, coming out into the arena with her helmet still on so that you couldn't see exactly who she was. When she removed the helmet to do the reveal, what we saw was Ember Moon. Ember Moon has been out for several years now with an injury, and so there was some doubt as to whether or not they would ever have Ember Moon back in competition again. Some thought her career may be over. So not only is she back from injury, but apparently instead of being on the Raw or SmackDown, which is where she was at the time she was injured, they're moving her back to NXT. I think this is a good move for her. The SmackDown and Raw women's divisions are relatively crowded right now. Ember Moon has been off TV long enough that those folks who maybe haven't watched in a while would not necessarily know who she was or remember who she was. It's probably a good time, since she's had so much time off, to put her on NXT, a brand where she's more likely to get high-profile matches, rebuild that character, reestablish her with the fan base before moving her back on to either of what they call the main programming, but really isn't anymore. It's not the main roster so much as it's just different rosters. But I think NXT is where she'll be most appreciated. So it's good to see Ember Moon back and know that apparently she's well enough to continue her in-ring career. And that will bring us, folks, to the final match of the evening, the main event. I knew that this match was probably going to be going long. The NXT Championship match between the champion Finn Balor and Kyle O'Reilly. Those entrances began at 8:48. This is on a pay-per-view that started at 7, so you're not 2 hours into the pay-per-view and you have the main event getting ready to begin. So I thought that they were going to be pacing themselves for a long contest, and early on that's kind of what we saw, a sort of methodical, mat-based, lots of strikes match, very hard-hitting. I think that this match may have had a bit more juice behind it had the fan base been used to Kyle O'Reilly being established as a singles competitor. I know a lot of folks think of him as a perennial tag team specialist with Bobby Fish, and they've hovered around those NXT titles pretty much since the Undisputed Era debuted on NXT a couple of years ago. But for old school fans, anyone familiar with O'Reilly's work outside of NXT, you know from his time in Ring of Honor that he was a highly skilled singles competitor. And I'm excited about the fact that we may be starting to see that on the NXT brand. And tonight definitely felt like an old school ROH match between Balor and Kyle O'Reilly, in that it really played off O'Reilly's strength as a judo practitioner and a mat-based technician. They were very stiff with the strikes. They didn't go to the air as much as you might think, considering Balor was involved, but Balor can also wrestle many different styles. And I think that they decided the story of this match was going to be a hard-hitting, strike-based mat contest. And that's what we got. We got a fight between these two. One kind of clunky spot that still ended up working out was a rebound lariat, where O'Reilly was tossed into the ropes and came back off the ropes with a lariat that he staggered into because that bottom rope did not give him the rebound he was expecting. This loose bottom rope actually was a problem a couple times in the night. I kept waiting for them to tighten it during one of the commercial breaks, or during one of the opportunities to do so while they were showing the video packages, because there were a couple of attempts of men and women coming off that bottom rope, springing themselves to the floor, where they looked like they had trouble getting the lift that they were expecting because that bottom rope was so loose. And it definitely affected O'Reilly on the rebound lariat. But because of the way he staggered into it, he actually hit Finn Balor with more force than he probably would have had they had that one worked out a little better. You had great psychology in this match, just like you'd expect from the two participants. O'Reilly was working the knee throughout most of the contest, and he kept coming back to the knee. Balor, of course, being a pro, also kept selling the knee. It looked very good. It ended with a coup de grace from the top rope by Finn Balor. It's not really that this match was probably that contested as far as who was going to win. We all probably knew that Finn Balor is too recent to that title, and O'Reilly not quite established as a singles guy. But if anything, this match does just that. It establishes Kyle O'Reilly as a legitimate singles threat. And if that was what they were intending, then job well done by both men, because that's what we got by the end of the contest. And that final bell came at 9:22. So we are 2 hours and 22 minutes into the pay-per-view when the in-ring action ended. That's pretty amazing, and again shows that NXT does not do much in the way of filler. And this is again a very tight pay-per-view. They kept the number of matches limited so that each of them can have enough time. Each of them had a story behind them. And again, the worst match of the night, still a solid B. Several A matches, including that main event, I would say would be in that definite A category, as well as what I thought was the sort of stealth show stealer in the cruiserweight title match between Escobar and Swerve Scott. The opening contest, too, got real near that A line, if maybe A minus or so, with Damian Priest and Johnny Gargano. So definitely check this out. The show itself ended actually not on the match and the victory of Finn Balor celebrating. It ended on an angle. As the replays were being shown of the finish of the main event, Rich Holland ended up coming to the ring with a prone Adam Cole over his shoulder, and he dumped him there at ringside for the rest of the Undisputed Era to see. So that was sort of the mystery we ended on tonight. Obviously, Rich Holland was involved, Why did he attack Adam Cole? Is he announcing a war against Undisputed Era? I know a lot of folks keep waiting for Undisputed Era or at least Adam Cole to be making that leap to Raw or SmackDown, but the fact that they keep involving him in angles makes you think that they realize that he is needed right now on the NXT brand, and they may not actually be in as much of a hurry as everyone had made it sound to move him up to the other shows, particularly in this time when there are no fans to react to him in the crowd. Maybe it's best to just keep him on NXT for a while. He certainly hasn't overstayed his welcome, but it looks like we're moving into a new stage of storyline for Undisputed Era and Adam Cole involving Rich Holland in some sort. But where does that leave the world title scene? Where does that leave Finn Balor? What does Kyle O'Reilly do now that he has failed at wresting that belt away from Finn Balor? Does he get a rematch? Does he stay a single star? Does he go back to a tag team with Bobby Fish? A lot of different ways they could go, a lot of questions that all will hopefully be resolved over the next few weeks as we dive back into our regular schedule of NXT on Wednesday nights. So that is the review for the night of NXT Takeover 31. Successful show all the way around. Go check it out. Thank you for tuning in to the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We do hope to have our second bro back with us at some point in the very near future. Hopefully next week we can welcome Doug back, and we will be back at our normal time here on Facebook and YouTube, and that would be at 8 o'clock. And be sure to join us then. In the meantime, watch wrestling. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.